I want to introduce you to the cranky uncle. According to John Cook, every family has at least one. They're to be avoided because they hold views that are dangerous and wrong, often dangerously wrong. The cranky uncle has his own book and even a game that children can play on their phones to teach them about climate change and vaccines. I'm reminded of an old Bruce Petty cartoon. He was one of Australia's most celebrated political cartoonists. In the cartoon, Petty explained that grandparents are subjected to an older and less sophisticated conditioning that our children must be protected against for the good of society. The same may also be said of dangerous uncles. The images here are taken from a presentation John Cook gave 5 months ago. In showing this image, he emphasised that explaining the techniques of misinformation is a useful way of countering misinformation. He also introduced us to his flick method, and we will look at each of these 5 characteristics as depicted by images from the Cranky Uncle book. As I stated in the associated article, I don't find Cook's work funny, especially when it's meant to be. Not being funny is one thing, but there's the spurious nature of his analogies. Here you have a computer scientist operating on a fellow with a saw, as you can see. In the related video, he points out how ridiculous this is, and we wouldn't let it happen. This is supposed to be analogous to allowing anyone other than a climate scientist to comment on climate change. But as David Leggett's work shows, Cook's consensus is built on a very thin argument. The case might equally be made that Cook's climate scientists are operating on the wrong patient or amputating the wrong leg. The second misinformation technique from his Flick series is logical fallacy. This covers a number of ills. John selects one example of logical fallacy called single cause. This is where there are, in reality, multiple causes, but the misinformer tries to focus attention on one cause. As a real-life example of this, people trying to portray humans as the single and certain cause of near-future catastrophic climate change comes to mind. John then does something that appears to me a little bit sneaky. He uses a non-expert as the person representing his single cause of misinformation. His first example of a misinformation technique was the fake expert, yet here he is using a fake expert as an example of someone trying to sell a single cause. The man in the photo is Marco Rubio, a US senator, hardly an expert on climate change. John seems happy to have non-experts represent a position he can ridicule, but he doesn't want them interfering with his consensus. Too cute. The idea of the cranky uncle drawings seems to be that they depict such ridiculous scenarios that we laugh out loud at them. I'm not laughing. Here we have a man falling from a window who wants to know when he'll hit the ground. John also works in vaccine misinformation, where it seems we didn't have time to test the mRNA or AstraZeneca vaccines. We had to act. An agnotological framing has made sure the public remains unaware of the full impact of that decision. John's making the same argument here for climate change. There's no time to wait around, as supposedly we face serious problems in the near future. Now, I know these images are for children, but in the corresponding video, John is addressing an adult audience. The framing of these arguments is so transparently manipulative, the word puerile comes to mind. His next example is cherry picking, and here Cook highlights a particular aspect of this, anecdotal thinking. He uses the example of people experiencing winter cold and deciding global warming doesn't exist. I might remind him that another technique used in debate is the straw man, and John seems to have constructed a couple of big ones here. Accusations of cherry picking might equally be put to those who only look at warming since 1958 and those who only look at carbon dioxide as a cause of climate fluctuations. Here John tells us, and I quote, Whenever a person denies a scientific consensus or rejects what the global community of scientists agrees on, then conspiracy theories are inevitable. Because how else do you explain when the world of scientists disagrees with you? We are introduced to a schema on conspiracy theory and invited to download a handbook so you can get better at it. This is found at his Skeptical Science website. He goes on to explain what is wrong with you and your thinking. You tend to see patterns everywhere. You see meaning in randomness. Stop that. The second characteristic he wanted to highlight was that conspiracy theorists are immune to facts. Now, in the last 4 years of COVID, have you met anyone like that? He continues that conspiracy theorists have a high degree of distrust of scientific facts and institutions and are characterized as holding a nihilistic skepticism. How truly horrible is that? Unthinkable. Lastly, let's see some of John's work in action. As part of a debunking process, he introduced participants in a study to some misinformation. At least that's how he described it. This was the Global Warming Petition Project, which challenged the climate change consensus. The results seem to show conservative people are easily led or well informed. As you can see, the more politically conservative people were, they tended to believe the misinformation. It was as though they had no mind of their own, or rather that Cook's study had backfired. I assume this confirmed for him that conservative people are pretty stupid. Next, he achieved something astounding. He rounded up a new group of people and inoculated them. No, save your horror, it wasn't with mRNA. It was with a tobacco advertisement. Through this tobacco advertisement, he explained how misinformation works. He then showed his new group the misinformation, and this time they didn't fall for it. Hooray! I can only assume these people knew nothing about the world till they entered this study. I hope the Moonies or some other doomsday cult doesn't find them. As John explains, inoculation theory takes the idea of inoculation and applies it to knowledge. Here people are exposed to a weaker version of the misinformation and are inoculated with it before you put before them what you want them to believe. It sounds more like programming or an MK Ultra technique. Having mentioned debunking, I can't let you go without saying a little bit about it. In fact, there are different types of bunking. You can pre-bunk or debunk. And you can have a logic-based method of disarming misinformation or a fact-based method. You can explain how the misinformation trick works via its logic or simply deal with facts. And this last part of John Cook's work explains the results he achieved by using these different methods. Sadly, from an agnotological point of view, you can use these techniques to debunk people into madness and confusion, which seems to be the role of a lot of government agencies these days. It might pay us to spend a little time studying similar techniques. I suspect there are some much more sophisticated social conditioning programs being conducted than we have looked at here. The idea that CO2 is not a plant food came as a revelation to me too. How about you?